Jazzcast Pros.
It's been a minute since we've been with you, but we're back, and we're going to be back with some consistency. We're going to be back with some real fire. Information is a valuable tool in the fight for liberation. I mean, one of the first things that our oppressors did was to diminish our means of communication, diminish our means to read, because they understood that information is just a valuable tool for free people. And if you can limit the people's ability to obtain information or even distort the information that is available to them, they'll be pretty easily controlled. So that's why it's so very important for us to be reaching out to you. And we're doing that today for the Buffalo Center for Health Equity, where our mission is to eliminate race-based health disparities. And one of the things that we want to really talk about specifically today is titled Violence is the Output. Where does it begin? America, the United States of America, is the only country that actually has more guns than people. Violence is the output. Where does it begin? And convening to discuss gun violence as a public health issue. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Hello, this is Pastor George Nicholas, and welcome again to Igniting Hope Podcast. Igniting Hope Podcast comes out of our work at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity. One of the worst parts of being a pastor, Sherman, is I have to do funerals for young people who have been victimized by gun violence. There's nothing you could really say that could frame it in any sense of sanity or any sense of normalcy. You search for words to encourage and give people hope. But the reality is this stinks and it shouldn't be. Right? Right? That's not God's will. What are you talking about? Every year during Black History Month, we have a mini conference. You know, we have our annual Igniting Hope Conference. That's usually in either August or September. And we just completed our 6th annual one. And we have some exciting news about our 7th one that's going to be coming up. But usually during Black History Month, we have kind of a mini conference on some very important topics that are facing this community and this nation. And this year, our focus is going to be on gun violence. And so we're going to have an End Gun Violence conference titled Violence is the Output. Where does it begin? I want you to go onto our website, buffalohealthequity.org, buffalohealthequity.org, and I want you to register. The event will be Thursday, February 29, 10 a.m. Thursday, February 29, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's going to be at the Smith Auditorium at the Erie County Medical Center, 462 Grider Street. We were strategic about the time and the location. Why the time? Well, we really want to reach our young people. And so we're working with some local schools to get some release time for a bunch of very mature young people to come and engage in this conversation. And then secondly, the location, the Erie County Medical Center, which is the trauma center in this region. So the many gun incidents of gun violence, when they occur in our region, the trauma center is where they go. And so we want to claim that space as a healing space, not only of the physical, but of the mental and spiritual things. Because this notion of gun violence is really, it's not contained to just law enforcement. That's why we're so very, very intentional about having our conversations shifting from law enforcement to a public health issue, right? We support gun control and gun rights and all that other stuff. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so that's why we're going to have experts coming in from communities where they've done some really effective work in dealing with gun violence as it relates to our young people. We're going to create spaces for our local organizations that are been engaged in these issues around gun violence. So we're not positioning ourselves to be the expert. But one of the things that we do at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity is is we create spaces for those who are doing the work. We want to support them. We want to let people know, hey, here's folks that are doing some great work. We want to expand the table. We want to engage other people. More people. You think about, my wife always gets on to me about this, and I'm trying to grow. But so you see this thing about Shannon Sharpe and Cat Williams, right? After only one weekend, there was like 30 million views, right? And so, what would our community look like if 30 million people got engaged in a conversation about how to reduce gun violence in our community? And this, what was so deep about this, and I'm here with Brother Sherman, who's doing some great work with our young people and with men, and you all know Sherman, and he's got an event coming up in March.
So, what's up, everybody? I'm Sherman Webb-Middlebrooks. So manager of the Men's Health Initiative. And so we have events coming up February 19th as well over at the Tri-Main Center. We're holding circles for men to just pull up support groups. So come break bread, have fellowship, network, and just get invested in personally and make them networks to help yourself financially in the community.
So buffalohealthequity.org, you can find some information about that on there too as well. And so, log on to our website. We're improving it. We're going to make it better. We're going to get more. The 2024 is going to be a year of just improvement, of growth, of just getting better, all of us. But 30 million people. So what if we had that? No, it's probably more than that now. And that thing was like an hour. I sat down.
It actually broke the record of the most viewed interview on YouTube, like over 50 million views now.
Yeah, 50 million people, right? But a lot of them were black folks, right? And that thing was how long? About an hour and a half, 2?
No, it was like 2.5, 3 hours.
Right? Yeah. So, man, I ain't mad at y'all. That's not the debate here, but I'm just saying. But, man, if we could get our people conditioned and they're thinking about doing things that are going to really heal our folks.
I think there's room for both.
Yeah. Okay.
So I feel like sometimes people, because I find myself guilty of it too, where we rather be entertained instead of informed.
Right.
And when I become cognizant of that, I'm like, there needs to be room for both. I've had enough entertainment. Right. I need to go seek some information. So I'm all about balance. So watch the Cat Williams thing. That's fine. But after that or before that, check out our podcast and check out what we're doing with the Buffalo Center for Health Equity and get yourself some information.
Right. Chuck D. would call it infotainment.
There we go.
The data shows that even in states that have some of the strictest gun laws, i.e. New York State, where we live, New York State has one of the strictest gun laws in the country. And remember the football player Plaxico Burress back, I think it was shortly after the Super Bowl or whatever, and he was in a club and he wasn't using his gun, but he had a gun. And I think it misfired or something happened in his pocket or something, but they became aware and he got a lot of trouble. He didn't hurt anybody in anything, but just having that gun in New York State in certain places can get you in some really significant legal trouble. But that fact didn't deter the fact that someone came into Top Supermarket with a gun that he, I guess, allegedly legally purchased and unloaded and murdered 10 of our wonderful friends and family members. It didn't stop the young man who fired into a crowd randomly and struck 13-year-old Miracle Hunt and killed her. It didn't stop the individual who on the highway unloaded his gun in a Buffalo Sewer Authority vehicle and murdered Keyshawn Galt. So the presence of the laws themselves have not proven to be the kind of deterrent in order to keep ourselves safe. It's a cultural thing. There's all these things that are going on in this country. America is in love with the gun. I mean, we just got to admit that. We got to acknowledge that America, the United States of America, is the only country that actually has more guns than people. So there's, I don't know, roughly 350 million Americans. There's about 400 million guns. So there's more guns than there are actual people, which is something that you just don't find that in other countries, right? This love affair with firearms, with guns, is rooted back into Race is really, it's at the root of the gun culture in America, right? And so there's 393 million guns in the United States of America. Let's just round that up to about an even 400 million, right? And that's a lot of guns, y'all. And of those guns, about 20 million of them are assault rifles, right? Those kind of military issued things, maybe more. But what's interesting, the distribution of guns is not, it's not an even distribution. So it's not like there's a gun per household. It could be, but it's not. And so roughly about 60% of the guns are owned by white men. And so there's this heavy arming of the citizenry with really heavy artillery, heavy kind of stuff. And so what are some of the outcomes? What happens when we live in a culture that has this fantasy, this obsession with firearms? Well, what happens is it doesn't make our country safer. I mean, crime is a real problem in this country, and the fact that individuals have guns doesn't stop people from breaking into people's houses and doing all kinds of stuff. But one of the outcomes is that in America, the number one leading cause of death for our children, teenagers, children and teens, right? And so, well, it's probably cancer, right? We see the commercials about the children and cancer, and all these organizations that are really working on that, and it's important. We need to do that. And we see the Shy Children's Hospital in Roswell, and they address the issues of cancer, and that's a big problem, right? And so then you think about maybe vehicles. You got young people who are out there, they get their license and they're out playing speed racer out there on the road, and that's that. Maybe drugs. People are worried about fentanyl and all that other stuff. But that's none of those things are the leading causes. And almost, if you kind of almost combine all those, they don't really hit. The leading cause of death is firearms. So think about it. We live in a society, a country, where if you have a teenager, this is by the data, what's the most probable way that child, if he dies early or she dies early? Well, by percentage, it's by a firearm, right? And so there's a sickness in our country that we got to address. We got to address, because what happens is the Miracle Hunts and the Keyshawn Galts and the beautiful people, and with the May 14th situations, and just folks, just ordinary, everyday people, kids, going to school, and children, Sandy Hook, and Uvalde, and people going to church, or people going to the movies, or people going to a nightclub. I mean, there's just there's no place in America, nowhere. Beaches, amusement parks. I mean, there are cases of gun violence in almost anything that you could think about, right? There's no place there's been gun violence on military bases, right? So you think, well, at least they're there, right? We got troops that get killed on the military base. So this gun culture is really, really deep. So that's why we're going to have one of our event. Again, go to buffalohealthequity.org, buffalohealthequity.org, and register and plan on attending. Violence is the output. Where does it begin? A convening to discuss gun violence as a public health issue. And that's on February 29 at the Erie County Medical Center. So why is it so important to frame it as a public health issue? Well, when you frame it as a public health issue, you begin to look at what are the root causes that are driving the incident, right? So the gun itself, or the presence of the gun, can take a volatile situation and make it a deadly situation, right? But the volatility, but just removing the gun from the incident, while it will decrease the probability for that incident being fatal or being something that creates serious bodily harm, right? What do we do with that anger, that culture of violence that kind of drives that? And then what happens afterwards, right? So the injury of witnessing an act of violence creates trauma. And we know that studies have shown that many of our young people have actually witnessed numbers at higher levels than troops in active duty and dealing with PTSD, right? And, right? And so our children who So think about, you know, how now children are organizing fights and then witnessing them, not only being there physically present or watching them. What that's doing is it's bringing trauma that they don't maybe not even understand. They're getting desensitized to violence and all this other stuff. And then once our young people are victims of violence or even perpetrators of violence, there's a psychological, spiritual, social kind of damage that creates this atmosphere that just breeds incredible levels of violence, right? And so now you introduce the presence of a firearm, right, which will enable and empower someone to really inflict a lot of damage that they may not have even imagined they could inflict, but now with having this firearm. So we have to look at legislation to diminish the access to guns. We got to stay with that, Stu. But we got to start thinking about why are these incidences keep going on, and then how do we heal people from the trauma, right, of being engaged in that. Again, reminding you, February 29, our conference ending gun violence, February 29 at 10 a.m. at the Erie County Medical Center. Log on to buffalohealthequity.org. So what is some of the roots? What is driving some of this thing? And I made the assertion that race plays a big role in just the prolific numbers of gun ownership in America, and the actual numbers. Again, America, more guns than people. Okay, and so there's a wonderful book by Carol Anderson, and you should really check it out. It's called The Second: Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America. And so one of the arguments that people will make about guns is that, hey, it's our Second Amendment and we have our rights and our founding fathers and all this other stuff. Same founding fathers that owned some of y'all's fathers, but that's another thing. But this notion of the gun, okay, it was never in the writings of the document, the idea of Black folks having guns. That wasn't even, we were 3/5 of a human being. So,
right.
so the notion of having a weapon, right, that was like, nah, that's for us, that ain't for you. And so one of the things about the story of our enslavement that began in 1619 in North America, 1519 in South and Central America, is that not everybody was just rolling with the slavery thing, right? And we know that the Haitian Revolution and other places, there were revolts, right? And there were some revolts here in America before it was in America, in the colonies, right? And usually these revolts were suppressed pretty quickly. Some were took a little more energy by the slave owners to hold folk down, but they were a reality. So with the news and the information of the Haitian Revolution, they said, well, we cannot have that. We're not doing that. So as some slaves tried to revolt, they had to make legislation. They had to figure out a way to keep this down. So one of the ways to protect the slave owners was to make sure that the slave owners were well armed. So in this book, let me just read a couple paragraphs, if I may. And we're going to be with you for a minute. I'm not going to hold you for 2.5 hours like Shannon Sharp and Cat Williams, but I'm going to hold you for a little bit. In the book, and this was in a response, so there was a revolt. And so South Carolina's response was twofold and brutal. First, in 1740, the legislature issued monetary rewards for the scalp of a slave found attempting to escape to St. Augustine. So what had happened was that St. Augustine's, Florida, and the Spaniards, so the Spaniards were they said, listen, if y'all can break loose from there, you come down here to St. Augustine's, Florida, you can be free. I don't know how much they were. I don't know about that, but that was the deal. So some of the slave revolts, hey, if we bust up out of here, we can go down to St. Augustine's and we live as free Florida. People. Okay. So what they did was in South Carolina, and said, well, wait a second, we got to make sure that folks know that that's not a viable option, right? And so one of the things, it's so funny when people, you see the word scalping, right? So one of the misnomers of that was something that the indigenous folks did. No, that was what the Europeans did, right? But anyway, lawmakers quickly moved to codify never before and exactly what the enslaved were, what they could not do, and equally important, what could be done to them. So the Negro Act of 1740. So think about that. That was before the Declaration of Independence. So what was interesting is the colonizers were regulating the behavior and codifying the ownership of people of African descent before they were even writing documents about their own liberation. Think about that. So the Negro Act of 1740 had its foundational principles that Negroes were absolute slaves, including those not even born yet. They were property. They were instinctually criminal, and therefore they must be kept in due subjection and obedience. What was the underlying premise? The statute, which became the model for slave codes through North America, required heavy-handed white control that curtailed the enslaved's movements, their literacy, right to self-defense, and access to firearms. Very important. Any actual variance from these strictures, such as hitting or killing someone white, or even carrying a gun, could happen only with the explicit consent of and benefit to a white person. So if you had a weapon, it had to be for the explicit purpose of protecting a white person. And who would that white person be protected from? A black person.
Right.
And so if the enslaved stepped outside these parameters, severe punishment, including death, awaited them. Meanwhile, whites, particularly on plantations, were stacking up the arms. Scholars who pored over the probate records revealed that 50% of all wealth holders in the 13 colonies, 50% of all the wealth holders in the 13 colonies in 1774 owned guns.
Wow.
And so, and guns, they weren't mass producing guns back then, you know what I mean? So it took a lot to get a gun.
Just go to Walmart.
Right. So 50%. That percentage soared. So we're in 1774. That percentage soared to 69% when isolated to the South. In North Carolina, 77% of the people had guns. South Carolina, 70%. Virginia, 68%. Maryland, 62%. Were well above the average for the 13 colonies. Indeed, now here's a real good one, 81% of slave-owning estates had firearms. And plantations with the largest numbers of enslaved people were 4.3 times more likely to have guns than those with few or no slaves. The fear of the enslaved's retribution and the determination to keep them and the relative small number of free blacks under control were not just Southern phenomena, though. Slavery and its tentacles were nationwide, both in terms of human bondage and economic benefits. In the early 18th century, approximately half the tonnage of New England shipping had been in transporting slaves. So while the slave trade was booming in the South, the shipbuilding industry was booming in the North. So this notion that, and like Malcolm said, anything south of Canadian border was the South. And so in New York, 14% of populations were enslaved. 14% in New York, 14% of the population were slave folks.
They forget that we had slavery up here.
Yep, 14%. And in New Jersey and Rhode Island, about 8%. This had influenced the shape of the northern colonies' laws, such as they had done in the South. And as early as 1680, Massachusetts, liberal Massachusetts, banned Negroes enslaved from the militia because the colony feared what would happen if they were armed. New York did the same after a slave insurrection scare in 1741. Even the supposedly anti-slavery Quakers, and I got a lot of good Quaker friends, they're good folks, who dominated colonial Pennsylvania, passed a statute saying, if any Negro shall presume to carry a gun or a pistol or other arms or weapons, whatever, without his master's special license.
Wow.
He shall be whipped with 21 lashes on his bare back.
Colonizers.
All 13 colonies, in fact, had had some arms control law forbidding the possession of guns by suspect groups, including Indians, in their words, I use the word indigenous people, slaves, and sometimes free blacks.
That's crazy. So this country has been policing our rights or our ability to protect ourselves from our oppressors since before this country was a country.
Yes. And the central tool to enable that to happen was the gun.
Yeah.
When you put these things in the context of the right, I got the right to own these weapons, and we've always had a right to. That's not true. Right. And the Second Amendment was really put in place to control us, not to empower us. So it really was there so that folks who in the South and in the North, if they needed a pistol, a weapon, a rifle, in order to contain the movement and the freedom of people of African descent and indigenous people, they had a legal right to do that. And in some places, they were even encouraged. Because one of the things they talk about in terms of, and people say about the militias, this had nothing to do. They understood that a militia, like a citizen militia that was not properly trained, would not be able to protect the colony from foreign invasion.
Yeah.
So that's why they had an army.
Right.
Trained. So folks, army. But in order to control domestic affairs, the militia, because one of the biggest fears was this notion of an African revolt.
So is that similar to the government utilizing the National Guard to come down and subdue civil rights?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, the National Guard, I think the National Guard people are still citizens, right? So it's not, because by law,
citizen militia.
Yeah, right. By law, I don't even think the president of the United States can sick the military on American citizens. I think it would have to be like kind of this really bizarre set of
law.
Right. Yeah. So, but the National Guard, that's why they call it the National Guard, right? So if that would have been me on January 6th, I wouldn't have called the National Guard. I would have called the Marines, right? So I said, we're going to get ready to put a halt to this right now, right? But you don't have the power to do that. Well, at that time, that president, who was the president at the time, wanted, he was for the other folks.
Nonsense.
Yeah. So understanding the context, this is Anderson again. A series of slave revolts in the 1600s and 1700s led to a number of laws in colonial America restricting Black people's access to weapons and meting out brutal punishment for possession and use of firearms. There was a concomitant creation of slave patrols, working hand-to-hand with militias to keep the enslaved population under control and, very important here, disarmed. And while the myth-making surrounding the second heralds the bravery and effectiveness of individual citizens in the militia as a bulwark against tyranny and foreign invasion, the reality, however, was decidedly more mundane. The militia could not take on an invading army, nor for any sustained effective amount of time. Governor Morris, a signature of the Constitution, knew this as he called the militia an expensive and inefficient force, which, as they learned during the Revolutionary War, could not be counted on to do much because to rely on a militia was to lean on a broken reed. Not only Morris knew it, George Washington knew it too. Nor, given Shays' Rebellion, could the militia be relied on to uphold law. Final point. This is why the current day veneration of the Second Amendment, driven by the lobbying and publicity campaign of the NRA, is frankly akin to holding the 3/5 clause sacrosanct. They both were designed to deny African Americans humanities and rights while carrying the aura of constitutional legitimacy. They both damaged American democracy and called into question the basic founding principles of equality. The second is lethal. Steeped in anti-Blackness, it is a loaded weapon laying around just waiting for the hand of some authority to put it to use. So her premise is that the whole notion of the Second Amendment was really a tool, a legal tool, to arm white citizenry to control black people.
I never thought about it like that. I mean, and that's not the way it's taught to us in school as a young person. That's not the way the narrative is spun in the media. And with COVID and after the Tops incident, the amount of black gun ownership that I've seen just in my own ecosphere is like shot up. I didn't know this many brothers had their license. I didn't know this many brothers in our community was licensed to offer the trainings and the classes. And so it's never presented like with the history and in the context. I think a lot of black men, I'll say, a lot of black men now feel a sense of pride in being able to exercise that right, I'll say. Feel a sense of safety and security and knowing that if one of the crazy colonizers decided to show up today, that they might have a chance at defending themselves potentially. I think that's the idea that a lot of black men like to hold on to. Now, whether that's true or not, the degree of which they're being trained, if that day is ever going to come, let's hope it doesn't. But I just know when I'm talking to people, the conversation isn't centered around guns used as a tool to oppress us as black people. The narrative is I need to have something on me in case some of these crazy colonizers decide to show up and do something crazy again.
Yeah, I guess it's an argument. It's not an argument based in science or history or facts, but it's an argument, and I can understand it. I don't hold that argument. So what has happened by arming the black community? So we say, okay, well, we don't have to do that, so we can go get weapons now. Yeah, we can. We do. And we do. We do. Maybe not at the rate that others, but maybe, I don't know. So we talked about the gun violence in youth, right? Yeah. Number one cause it, right?
That's sad.
So blacks in America, maybe 12, 15% of the population, something like that. Mm-hmm. You know what the percentage of gun deaths of youth are? So we saw these numbers, right? The number one cause of death for young people in America is gun violence. 80% of those deaths are black youth.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I hear exactly what I see it.
80.
I'm with them.
80.
Yeah.
So we're 12% of the population.
Yeah.
And our youth are about 5 times more likely to die as it relates to gun violence as white youth.
Yeah, it's frightening. And when you work with young people and we talk with young people, a lot of it, just to overgeneralize, I think it's just their lack of decision making skills, their inability to understand how to not make permanent decisions based off of temporary emotions, because they haven't been exposed to adults in their life who have the bandwidth, the ability, and the skills to teach them how to properly emotionally regulate, because the adults in their lives are going through so many things, spent in so many different directions. And maybe the way that they have been taught and conditioned to resolve issues in conflict is with violence and aggression. And what's more violent and aggressive than pulling out a gun? And unfortunately, what this society has taught us, at least in my opinion, is that, yeah, you can have a conversation to come to a resolution, but violence is much quicker and effective and efficient.
Much more efficient.
And so to teach people to no, it's worth it to have a conversation. It might be more efficient, but it's less effective when you're talking about building a just, safe society where people have, the freedom and ability to grow up and live healthy and safe lives. So without an argument or without a look or without somebody's insecurities or, again, lack of conflict resolution skills resulting in somebody losing their life, because once that trigger is pulled, even if the person who's on the other side of it, even if they survive, the individual who pulled that trigger, now you didn't open up a whole can of legal worms. You didn't open up other beef in the street now. It's not like the movies. And I think going back to your point about being desensitized, I'm kind of in that middle generation of I get it. But also I'm in the Grand Theft Auto generation too, where you do become desensitized to it. People act like they going to just respawn, or people don't expect to live long. it's the level of like competition and that level of insecurity amongst young people to want to stand out, to want to matter, to want to feel safe, and to want to feel like I am somebody. And unfortunately, I've seen in our culture a lot of young people, not all of them, because I don't want to generalize, but a lot of young people, especially I would say like the people who have influence over their peers. Those young people, in my experience, that are like street oriented, have been exposed to some level of the streets. For lack of a better term, they respect money and murder. So like if you don't got money, they not going to respect you. And if like you're not a murderer or willing to at least engage in severe acts of violence to get your point across, then a lot of times like young people don't respect you, look up to you, and revere you. And when I look at the adults who they listen to, the entertainers, even the athletes, you got Ja Morant running around throwing guns up in videos. But I'm thinking about Gilbert Arenas. When I was a youngster, he had an argument with his teammate and they both brought guns to the locker room. And like, it wasn't a big deal, kind of. Nobody was like, that's wild, that's outrageous. It was almost like, at least the old heads I'm looking up to were almost like, well, he had beef. He said he was going to do something to him. He came with a gun. It was almost like that's how you supposed to resolve it.
Him, I think he said it probably cost him about $50 million.
He sure did. Those temporary emotions had lasting consequences. And I think, unfortunately, our young people haven't been taught to be able to think down the line, because so much of their environment and the people they're looking to learn how to do this thing called life are in survival mode. The adults around them aren't thinking 5, 10, 20 years down the line. They thinking, okay, I'm going to make it to next week, check the check. And so at what point in time would it cross my mind that, oh, bang, I pulled this trigger, now I'm sitting down for 25 to life? Nobody tells you that side of it. The rappers don't tell you that side of it. When you're watching Power or you're watching The Wire or you're watching The Sopranos, they don't tell you that part of it. And unfortunately, we have a lot of media influencers raising our kids, and they don't tell you the other side of the story all the time.
So what is that other side? That kind of thinking is not how free people think. That's how slaves think.
That's right. Going back to what you were saying.
And so one of the things that we're going to do at our event, February 29 at Erie County Medical Center, 10 a.m. to 3, is really talk about those drivers that, Sherman was sharing. What's going on with us mentally, socially, spiritually, that is driving this gun culture?
What do we value?
Right. And do we understand the consequence? And how do we create a community? How do we create community where gun violence is not normative, that gun violence is not a reasonable and acceptable response to conflict, where gun violence is not glorified, where gun violence is not something that's seen as a necessary part of our culture, right? We choose this. So if we choose it, we can reject it. So we want to have those conversations. We're inviting, we have a number of schools. I know Health Sciences is going to be working with us on this, and we're going to be reaching out to some other schools, because we want to have a real conversation. We got some people coming in that is going to really help frame things in a healthy way, so that we can leave that auditorium with a different perspective. Now, on the legislative side, we're going to be looking at our county, state, city leaders to embrace this notion that gun violence is a public health issue. And so that, once that kind of statement is made by government, then that opens up opportunities for policy change, and also opens up opportunities for resources. So one of the really good things that President Biden has done is he's created at the White House level an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And a brother named Greg Jackson, who was a victim of a violent gun assault, but survived it, and used his story to become an advocate for change. And he was appointed by the president to run and lead this office. And I've heard him speak. I've met him. He's has a good relationship with Maston District Councilwoman Zanetta Everhart, because they connected after Zaire was a victim of gun violence at May 14th, her son. So there is movement, right? And certainly the parents and the families of Sandy Hook and others have shown great leadership around those issues and stuff. But we need to have a conversation within our own community about, what's happening as it relates to all this gun violence in our community. And even though some of the national data will show, that crime is allegedly going down and all this other stuff, go tell that to Miracle Hunt's mom right now, or Keyshawn Galt's mom, or any of the other people, parents, loved ones, friends, and family who have been victimized by gun violence and have lost a loved one, right? Go tell that to any of the family members of the May 14th 10, and those are just the kind of the most highlighted ones. Right. We know that, and please don't hear me if I'm not calling out your family, whatever was happened. They're all important. You're all valuable. I want the government to talk about how, like, what's the number of gun violence that we're looking for? 0.
Right.
Right. I don't want any adult, young person, senior, anybody to be a victim of gun violence. We don't have to accept that as a reality in our community. We don't have to accept that, well, it's going to happen. No, don't give away your freedom. Don't give away your power. When you accept the inevitability of evil, the inevitability of destruction, the inevitability of brokenness, then you've lost your sense of being a free human being. And you're allowing yourself for this culture to enslave you with a mindset, a mentality that is not in your personal best interest, and certainly not in the best interest of our community. So we got to switch. We got to switch our thinking. And we're not blaming anybody, but what we're saying is, here's an opportunity. One of the worst parts of being a pastor, Sherman, is I have to do funerals for young people who have been victimized by gun violence. There's nothing you can really say that could frame it in any sense of sanity or any sense of normalcy. You search for words to encourage and give people hope. But the reality is, this stinks and it shouldn't be. Right? Right? That's not God's will. What are you talking about? Well, if the Lord didn't want it to happen, it wouldn't happen. And we just say stupid crap. And
we think it sounds good.
Yeah, but it just locks us into this insanity, right? It's insane, right? And it doesn't keep you safer. More people die by self-inflicted accidental things than protecting their family.
Cheddar Bobs.
You know what I mean? Bobs. Oh, yeah. And they broke into my house and I pulled out my 9 and I shot them up and I protected my babies. Okay. When did that happen?
The chances of that happening are like slim to none.
Statistically, they're very slim.
Yeah, slim to none.
So let's get real, folks. Let's try to create a community of care. Let's try to at least, if we can't protect the adults, can we at least try to protect our young people?
Yes.
Can we? And so that's what this is all about. Let's end gun violence. And what's something we got to watch too about this is, and Brother Dobbins, God rest his soul, used to always, because his thing was the handguns, and understanding that there's a lot of energy talking about, hey, let's get rid of the AR-15s and all that other stuff, which I agree with, right? Well, most of our folks are dying because of the handgun. So we want to invite you. Please come out February 29. End gun violence. Violence is the output. Where does it begin? A convening to discuss gun violence as a public health issue. Go onto our website, buffalohealthequity.org, and you'll get all the information you need. You also get the information about our men's health programs and other initiatives that are going on. So just go onto our website, take some time. So Sherman, I know I took a little too long, but I didn't take 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
we're good.
We ain't pull a Shannon and Cat this time.
So hopefully this has been a blessing to you guys, and we love you. Everything that we do here at the Buffalo Center for Health Equity is done 100% because of our great love for you and for our community. We want to continue to build this movement and build this work. So join us February 29 in gun violence in our region, Erie County Medical Center, BuffaloHealthEquity.org, BuffaloHealthEquity.org, and you'll get all the information. I love you, and till next time.
Peace.